how you made Apex Legends, Battlefield, Star Wars.
Storytelling is deep in my bones.
Transmedia? Storytelling in video games?
I got a big fat no. He basically left a loaded gun on the table and was like, you know what to do.
Who controls the narrative?
Dev team was like, whatever you do, set your story on another freaking planet.
Marketing doesn't understand anything about building video games, and they butcher everything that we do.
It becomes the most watched video on the Apex channel.
11 million views.
That's when the magic happens.
Hi everyone, my name is Ninel Anderson. I'm CEO at Devoted Studios and I'm your host at Devoted SpeakEasy. Today we have an amazing guest with us, Neel Upadhye. Hi Neel.
Hey.
When I started diving deeper in your previous experience, I was like, what? Transmedia? Storytelling in video games? Making your games extremely successful? Well, I feel like Neel is the best person to walk us through all of this amazing content because Neel is 14-year veteran coming from EA. I want to dive into your journey, learn about how you made Apex Legends, Battlefield, Star Wars.
Storytelling has always been a passion of mine. It's something that's just deep in my bones. I went to USC Film School down in Los Angeles. And when I graduated, I had two job offers in front of me. One was to join a Hollywood post-production studio. It would have been a union job. I would have started dubbing tapes in the back. And one day, maybe I'd be lucky enough to touch an Avid. And the other job offer was to start as an assistant editor at Electronic Arts in their marketing department, cutting podcasts, actually. So it's coming full circle.
We have come full circle, Lord.
And I decided to take the job at EA because I thought that getting hands-on and starting to cut content right away was going to make me sharper at my craft and just improve my skills faster. So a few years in, I thought, oh no, I've made a huge mistake. All my friends that were getting coffee for Seth Rogen or Seth MacFarlane are in the writers' rooms now, and I'm in this other weird industry. As we all know, over the next decade, entertainment really just became one industry. And film, music, video games are all now vying for that same precious attention of the audience. And video games have just become even more powerful as storytelling mediums. And I was hooked. Over the time that I was at EA, they picked up the exclusive Star Wars license, and I made a passionate pitch to get onto that franchise. Eventually became a marketing creative director on that franchise for all the Star Wars games that EA released, starting with Battlefront 1 through working on Star Wars Jedi Survivor that came out earlier this year. I had a champion, I had a mentor at EA called Charles Kopp. And he was the head of content at EA. He pulled me aside one day and he asked me, well, what do you want to do? What are you passionate about? What do you think we're not doing that we should be doing? And I said to him that we're not doing enough storytelling in our marketing. We had a lot of content that was quite transactional. Let me inform you about the product and then you're going to buy it. Let me hype you up and then you're going to pre-order it. But we thought of the game as the entertainment and our trailers just as ads. And there seemed to be a real gap there for me because as video game makers, we obsess over things like DAU, metrics like that. Why? Because we know that it's easier to get a repeat customer. And we know that the longer you spend in a game, the more likely you are to show up again or show up for the sequel. And so wouldn't it be amazing if we could increase the DAU of a player with our brand, even when they don't have the controller in their hand? How can we entertain them outside of the game? I was entrepreneuring, if you will, my own department within the bigger system of EA, and eventually found the right first project that was going to give this endeavor for transmedia storytelling its first big hit, and that was Apex Legends.
Can you tell me more
what we did was try to gather as much data as we could from comps to give teams and stakeholders confidence that this was the right thing to do. And so we looked at the roadmap that had been laid by teams at Blizzard, teams at Riot, who had leaned into transmedia very early on and had eventually built robust internal teams to create that type of content with character shorts, really immersive websites that are engagement vehicles. And we were able to successfully show our stakeholders what the upside was. And one of the things that really struck out to me when we looked at this data is that the storytelling content on franchises like League of Legends or Overwatch or now Apex Legends and several others, the storytelling content is evergreen. So people may watch a trailer and it'll get a big bulk of views right around, let's say, a new season launch. And that's cool. That's important. But the stories about those characters that are unpacking where they come from, that make them desirable for you to want to collect or engage with, people will come back to those 6 months later, 2 years later. And so the graph for the aggregate views of those videos have a very long tail.
There's a couple of things I would love you to elaborate what transmedia is for, our viewers that haven't really, touched that part of the industry yet.
So what is transmedia? The way I think of transmedia is telling one story through multiple mediums and channels and creating an ecosystem or a flywheel that is able to take the viewer or the player through all of these different mediums with smooth handoffs and still be able to have things make cohesive sense if they don't hit every channel.
Who controls the narrative? Is marketing the one who creates the story around, let's say it's a story of a character, or it's the design and then just marketing takes that narrative and beautifies it and makes it more of a commercial selling story?
It was always the game team that owned the narrative, had the vision for the characters, knew what their story was going to be in the game. What I would do as basically a department that was trying to break down the walls between marketing and development. The best way to do that was when the marketing content wasn't just reacting to the game, but the game was reacting to the quote unquote marketing content. As an example, we started to do on Apex Legends character shorts, if you will. We called them original programming. And we were doing character shorts for these legends. And instead of just taking the backstory of a particular character, making a short film, we would actually work very closely with the developers to theme an event or theme a cosmetic skin that reflects what's happening in this story, develop those in tandem. And so all of a sudden, the experience that the player is having is I'm running around in the game, and all of a sudden, there's this hatch to this secret facility under the map. And then in the game, you can get this legendary skin that reflects how you saw the character in this pivotal moment in their life. And now, compared to any other cosmetic in the game, having that skin is allowing you to really role play as that character in that moment. And so now you're in the story. That's really when the magic happens. And as you can extrapolate, it takes a lot of coordination. It takes a really big leap of faith for a development team to say, hey, we're going to fold these weird ideas you have into our development plan. We're going to take the precious resources we have to build these additional things, build these events. And so the planning for these things would break out well over a year in advance so that we could line up these types of things.
What you were able to build is the additional emotional connection to the skins, to the characters. In game development in general, people are like, well, there's production, there's evil marketing. Marketing doesn't understand anything about building video games, and they butcher everything that we do. And what you guys were able to, first and foremost, put marketing and production in the same room, which is, in my opinion, is the number one challenge.
Oh my gosh, that was so exceptionally difficult. I have PTSD just thinking about it. So let's talk about Apex. I love Respawn. It was some of my best years at EA. We're working on their games. I went to Los Angeles, to Chatsworth, to the Respawn studio. And I spoke with the team there about this tiny little weird experiment that they were going to do called Apex Legends. We were about 6 months away from the game coming out. And here I come saying, hey, you guys are a perfect use case for doing transmedia storytelling. Just like League of Legends, when it first came out, you have no single player. You have characters that people need to love and spend hours and hours with. You have no mechanism for storytelling in the game. Marketing can be that additional bandwidth and be the channel for storytelling that brings these characters to the world. It's perfect. Let's do it. And I got a big fat no. That was a crappy meeting. Basically what happened is Mo Alavi, who was the narrative director on Apex Legends at the time, I had done as much research as I could about the game and its characters going into this meeting. And of course, I'd gotten a ton of details wrong because like any game, things are continuously changing. Mo, of course, was like, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And just, it all goes to just make my point that this is a new IP. We're figuring it out. You can't just like go play the game and then understand the universe. There's nothing there yet. The head canon of what everything is different in my head, his head, your head, that head. And so nobody that's not in this building on this team can possibly do what you're trying to do. And so I just was like, well, okay, I'm just going to start working from here. And I started driving all the way across town and just started showing up at the office, their office, every single day. And they still wouldn't take meetings with me because they're like, this is ridiculous. We've got a game to ship. We don't have time to do this. But because I would just rub shoulders with them and see them and force my way in and talk to them every time they're trying to go to the bathroom, I got just a number of contact points and talking to someone over coffee in informal meetings, non-pitch settings, and a bunch of no's, finally got to something that they thought was cool. And so what they did is they armed me with data. As soon as the game came out and it blew up and it became a big success, they're like, okay, now we really want it. And that's its whole own story. And we were able to look at pick rates. What characters are being used the most? What is the favorite character in the meta right now? What is the video that would be most likely to blow up and expand? And so we were able to help mitigate the risk of what if we just spend a bunch of money on some CG short that flops with data. The character that really stuck out immediately was a character called Wraith. In the pages of the lore, not explained to the player at all, was the idea that she's actually passing through different dimensions in the same location. We kind of came to this pitch that really inverted what was so cool. It really inverted people's expectations of this character. Here's this awesome ninja lady that can open portals and run everywhere. She's so strong and she's like the top picked character. And we told a story of basically the character you're playing is actually not this super strong character. She is the weakest version of her in every dimension. And the version of her in our dimension went to her dimension to rescue her. And in that rescue, she switched. So the character you're playing is actually an alien, essentially from another dimension, and is trying to aspire to reach the level of her clone, her, spiritual sister, if you will, that is so different. And so that's what ended up being Voidwalker, the first short that we did for Apex Legends. The marketing team for Apex had come up with this kind of comic book look for the key art. And so we wanted to make the short film in the style of that, like a comic book come to life. It was about 1 week before it was supposed to come out. There were visual bugs all over the place. So we have our second to last review of the film. And Dusty, who was I think he was like the COO of Respawn at the time, Dusty Welch. He watches it. The whole dev team is there. Everybody's there. They watch it with crossed hands. Lights come up. And Dusty goes, you know what? It's okay. I don't know. People are going to like it. Quality. I don't know. And then he basically was like saying, I'm not going to kill it, but if you guys are smart, you would. He basically like left a loaded gun on the table and was like, you know what to do, and walked out the door.
You are in a room and there is a gun on the table.
And so the organization had absolutely no confidence that we were going to make it. And I don't blame them, because it looked rough 1 week before it came out. I got on a plane, flew out to the studio that was animating, pulled a lot of late nights. I worked a straight 36 hours, maybe longer, and then went straight to the airport to fly home after sending it to LA and having them screen it again and say, okay, fine, it's just barely good enough. We'll put it out. And I was so exhausted. I completely just sat down in my chair before the plane took off, woke up, and it was on the ground in LA. The video comes out. It becomes the most watched video on the Apex channel, which was, again, only like 6-7 months old at the time.
No, they'll kill me. No one ever makes it out.
I did.
I mean, it's 11 million views.
At the time, I think it ended up aggregating 45% of all the views on the channel. So the narrative content was outsizing everything. And as the project had been going, people had been championing it, because here's the thing about trust, and it's really just building trust. That's the whole theme here. When I first pitched this whole concept, this whole story, the dev team was like, whatever you do, set your story on another freaking planet. Don't go anywhere near the games. I don't want to hear about the levels that the game takes place in. I don't want it connected to the game. And I was like, but that's what's going to make the transmedia thing work. And they're like, no, because if you write a story about a spaceship crashing in the middle of the map, now players will want to see the spaceship crash in the middle of the map, and you're going to create dependencies for us, and we don't have time for that. And they were like, set it on the freaking other side of the universe. Nothing to do with us. And then by the time Voidwalker came out, they were the ones that really came to us with the idea of, hey, we're going to build that set. Send us some of the assets. We're going to have this whole hidden lab under the ground. We're going to hide audio logs. We're going to write more stuff. Yes, we're going to do that skin with the super epic, awesome version of her from the other dimension. And so they fully got behind it. The transmedia thing just absolutely clicked. And that skin became the highest grossing skin.
Well, I'm really, really impressed about the success that you were able to build with Apex team. Did that success was able to support you building relationships with other studios? Because I know afterwards you worked on Star Wars and you worked on Battlefield. Did that help you? Or was it like starting from the ground up?
And yes, I got to play with both those franchises, which was a real pleasure. And so I worked with DICE really early on in their development of Battlefield 2042. They had a very particular design challenge where they were also moving to a heroes model at the time. And this was really different from the way that Battlefield had always told stories, which was, a particular real life conflict with two different sides. and they wanted to have your characters be playable no matter which side you spawned on in any given match. They brought me in just to work with the team on how that could be skinned and how we could crack that narrative problem. So the maps in that game were set all over the world. Singapore, Doha in the Middle East, and then we had in South America, Antarctica, India, really exotic places. And I just was passionate that if we could find a way to tell stories about how these conflicts between these superpowers are impacting these regions in a way that it didn't feel like just a Bond thriller where that's just an exotic background, but has nothing to do with the people there, we could land with something really special. With that one, we ended up relying on Twitter quite a bit, writing short stories, illustrating concept art about each level, and then putting them out as if they were the live reporting of a journalist that was on this epic, almost like thriller plot line that was going to end up weaving over the course of 18 months through all of these locations. And so we made up this character that was just like a live blogger journalist that basically got stuck on this refugee ship that's in the crosshairs of this conflict. And the very end of the story ends on a cliffhanger. And then we released this giant CG short film that confirmed the return of a character from Battlefield 4 that picked up right where that refugee boat had left off. And that confirmed the story that people would be playing when the game came out.
And I know you also worked on the Star Wars. It's a crazy known franchise, and it's, movie first, then video game. Was it different experience?
I've done 2 CG short films for Star Wars, one for the game Star Wars Squadrons, and that short film is called Hunted. And then I also directed the short film Disorder, which was a trailer in the long legacy of cinematic pieces in the gaming franchise Star Wars: The Old Republic. Star Wars Squadrons Hunted was a particular challenge because I had to earn the trust of the Montreal team at Motive that was making the game and earn the trust of Lucasfilm. And so it started with one, then the other. First, I went to Motive and I understood the story that they were making and the world that they were building. I put out the proposal, hey, instead of giving them like a teaser for how awesome this is as a trailer, let's just give them the whole kit and caboodle. We're going to make a freaking dogfight movie between an X-Wing and a TIE fighter that just reminds them how amazing that fantasy was in their heads when they were a kid flying around with their toys. And so we got Motive on board with that pitch, and then I took that pitch to Lucasfilm. And I think what really made that project sing was that we had a really unique take on this X-Wing versus TIE fighter dogfight movie, which was that the game was set after the events of Return of the Jedi. So the second Death Star is blown up, the Emperor is dead, and now the Empire is really the underdog. And so how interesting would it be to flip the tables and make a dogfight movie where the TIE fighter pilot is the hero or the perspective of the film? And what does it feel like for him to have an X-Wing ace, like Luke or Poe Dameron on his tail? We just continued to find ways to almost make you sympathize with the Empire and still keep them the bad guy, which is fascinating. And to bring this all to life, when we brought this idea to them, they're like, hey, this is great. This is all cool and everything. But if you're going to do something at this fidelity of storytelling, you have to use ILM. There was this scary moment where the script got passed up to the president of ILM, and they're like, who is this guy, Neel, on the script? This is nobody. He can't direct this thing. And I think this is just a testament again to relationships and building these strong relationships, because the video game folks on the video game teams at Lucasfilm who had worked with me for years went to bat for me and vouched for me. And I didn't even hear about it until it was all resolved, because I just got a call and they're like, hey, just want you to know this question came up and it's all fine. You're good. You're directing. And so that was awesome. And then COVID hit. Everything shut down. And I ended up directing the entire film remotely. We had a mocap stage, and I was directing from a webcam just like this and doing digital dailies remotely. John Knoll, inventor of Photoshop, one of the original ILM crew, was our visual effects supervisor. An absolute dream to be able to work and learn from him. And the piece came out great. And I got picked up for representation from WME and Anonymous Content as a result of that, and have continued to be, a filmmaker working with them since then.
I know that now you're a VP of production at Azra, which is a startup. But obviously, I'm pretty sure a lot of people who are, who would be hearing this interview, they're like, yeah, they didn't have a ton of budget. But I mean, not having a ton of budget for one piece of video is pretty much the entire budget a AA or like A+ studio has for the entire project. How can the knowledge and the tips and the tools that you've learned at such big company now be extrapolated on your new, a little smaller endeavor?
It's a great question. And I'm still learning the answer to it myself, because after 14 years at EA, going to a startup was a culture shock, and everything is different. If an issue at a big studio is the friction to make effective decisions quickly because there's so many stakeholders, the issue at a startup is often the opposite, that you just change too much as you're trying to figure out where you're going, because you can do anything. What helped is that I have always had this entrepreneurial spirit. And so even when I was at EA, I was making up most of the jobs I had there. I'd see an opportunity and I'd make a pitch. So that spirit helped me come to Azra. But when it comes to, well, how do you do transmedia on a budget or something? The first thing I would say is just copying what big studios do is not the answer. The clout or the cachet of a known IP just changes the expectations and the way that certain content is going to perform. Like with something like Star Wars, if you put out some teaser trailer that's just got a silhouette of a character and a lightsaber of a certain color turns on, everyone's going to go hog wild, right? And you're like, okay, that's going to be my first little drip feed content, and we're going to go out from there. If it's your own new IP, no one cares. No one has any context.
People are like, what's this gun? What's this creature? Who are they?
Exactly. And so you can't use the playbook of a big studio. You have to do something quite different. There's a balance between building in public and saving up some ammo so you can have like a big tentpole moment that really cuts through the noise. And so for a startup to have an organic voice, you're probably going to lean more in this direction. And so a higher content of small digestible things is going to go much further than big, fancy, high production tent poles. And if you took that same effort and broke it up into a bunch of tiny pieces, or broke them into mediums that can travel in bite-sized pieces and go viral easier, like social.
Do you feel like there's like a more successful channel to like attract users right now? Do you guys explore TikTok? It's not something that we were talking about even a few years ago. It's just like Twitter or like Kickstarter campaigns, or like, what do you think is it's working in 2023, and what do you think is going to be working let's say through 2025?
I can't say what's going to work in 2025 because we honestly don't know. But I think it's important to experiment on all those channels, and Ken is going to be a lot more articulate on what makes TikTok tick. We at Azra actually ended up spinning up a fake ghost channel and started putting out content just to see if we could get the algorithm to work for us. And we put out a random piece of content that ended up getting 1 million views out of nowhere. And we did it divorced from the Azra channel just to see if we could understand what made things tick. and what the upside would be to doing that type of content. Even though we got 1 million views on this piece of storytelling, we learned how few followers you can actually get from a viral hit like that, and how hard it is to translate that to the next video. It's not easy. I think TikTok actually throws you a couple early wins to kind of hook you as a creator, potentially.
Thank you, Neel, so much for joining us today. I've learned so much. It's just fascinating. I'm probably going to take a couple of days to just reflect and be like, where can I deploy that? Or how can I support the studios that we work with, with this fascinating knowledge. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was real fun.